Welcome to Science to Sleep By, the space where curiosity meets calm. Tonight, let us drift back in time, to an age when Earth was cloaked in ice and mystery. As you rest, I invite you to journey across frozen valleys, wander beneath towering glaciers, and listen to the echoes of creatures that once roamed a colder, quieter planet. Together, we will discover what Earth was like during the Ice Age. When we think about the Ice Age, it's easy to imagine endless snow, white landscapes stretching far beyond the horizon, and cold winds brushing across a frozen Earth. But to truly set the scene, to understand what the world was really like, we need to step back in time, far beyond the comforts of modern civilization. The Ice Age wasn't just a single moment in history. It was a chapter that stretched over millions of years, a story written in layers of rock, in the depths of frozen soil, and in the memories of the landscapes we still walk across today. The most recent Ice Age, known as the Pleistocene epoch, began around 2.6 million years ago and ended roughly 11,700 years ago. To put that in perspective, it's almost impossible for the human mind to truly comprehend such an expanse of time. Imagine thousands of generations of people, whole civilizations rising and falling, and yet the Earth remained locked in a rhythm of cold, retreat, and ice once more. The Ice Age wasn't constant, it moved like the breath of the planet itself. Glaciers pushing forward and retreating, seas rising and falling, climates shifting with the silent dance of Earth's orbit around the sun. During this time, vast portions of North America, Europe, and Asia were covered beneath ice sheets thousands of feet thick. Imagine standing in what is now New York City or Chicago, and instead of skyscrapers piercing the sky, you'd see towers of ice stretching a mile above your head. These were not gentle snowbanks. They were mountains of ice sculpted over centuries, pressing down on the land beneath them, carving valleys, and shaping rivers that still flow today. If you've ever seen the Great Lakes in the United States, know that they are remnants of this icy past, basins carved out by advancing glaciers, filled later by meltwater as the climate began to warm. But the Ice Age didn't mean that the entire Earth was frozen. The equatorial regions, the heart of Africa, South America, and parts of Asia, still remained relatively warm, though cooler than today. The world was divided, with icy kingdoms in the north and more habitable zones further south. In the United States, much of the northern land was locked beneath ice sheets, but further south, in places like Texas and Florida, life carried on in a world that was cooler, but still vibrant. Animals roamed, plants grew, and humans found ways to survive. Setting the scene of the Ice Age means remembering that it wasn't uniform. It was a patchwork of extremes, where glaciers existed alongside deserts, and icy winds could sweep across plains that supported vast herds of wildlife. The climate was colder, but it was also drier. So much water was trapped in glaciers that global sea levels dropped by more than 300 feet compared to today. Entire land bridges appeared, connecting continents. Most famously, the Bering Land Bridge connected what is now Alaska to Siberia. This bridge allowed not just animals, but humans, to migrate into North America. So, when we imagine the Ice Age, we're not only picturing icy landscapes, but also doorways between continents, pathways that shaped the very history of human movement and survival. In this frozen world, the air itself was different. Levels of carbon dioxide were lower, and that contributed to the cooling. The skies would have carried a clarity in colder regions, with sharper stars glittering against the dark of night, while storms and snowfall shaped the seasons. For people living in that time, the Earth was unpredictable, harsh, but also alive with opportunity. The cold forced adaptation. It demanded resilience. If you stood at the edge of one of these glaciers, the silence would be overwhelming. Imagine the creaking of ice, the sound of ancient sheets grinding slowly forward, the cracks and groans of frozen walls shifting with the weight of centuries. Every step in this world would remind you that the Earth was alive, always moving, always changing. Setting the scene of the Ice Age also means thinking about the animals that would have been seen against these icy backdrops. Woolly mammoths trudging slowly across snow-dusted plains, their heavy fur coats and curved tusks adapted to the cold. enormous ground sloths, saber-toothed cats, and giant bison roaming lands that looked different from the ones we know today. In what is now the Midwest, prairies stretched out beneath cooler skies, while in Alaska, vast tundras dominated the landscape. The United States itself was a land divided between ice and opportunity. The northern states were locked under glacial walls, places like Minnesota and Michigan buried deep beneath frozen sheets. But to the south, in places like Arizona or Florida, people and animals found refuge in landscapes that were still livable, though colder than we would recognize now. Imagine standing in what we know as Arizona, looking at deserts that were cooler, home to plants that could endure harsher conditions. Imagine Florida, not as the tropical haven of beaches and palms, but as a land where mastodons could be found wandering near wetlands and rivers. The Ice Age also gave Earth a particular rhythm. Glaciers advanced and retreated, carving out valleys, smoothing mountains, leaving behind rocks that had traveled hundreds of miles. When the glaciers retreated, they revealed land that was fresh and new, soil that would become fertile ground for future growth. Setting the scene means realizing that the Ice Age didn't just freeze the world, it reshaped it, preparing it for the forests, fields, and rivers that humans would later come to know as home. And even as the cold dominated, there were cycles within cycles. Warmer interglacial periods allowed brief respites, times when ice melted back, and ecosystems thrived again. Then, as Earth's orbit shifted slightly, the cold would return, and glaciers would once again advance. This ebb and flow lasted for millions of years, an earthly heartbeat that sculpted everything we see around us today. So when we talk about setting the scene of the Ice Age, we are describing more than cold weather. We are describing an era that shaped continents, redirected rivers, connected worlds, and forced life itself to adapt. It was a time of silence and power, a time when Earth was both dangerous and beautiful, a time when the stage was set for humans to rise and for landscapes we recognize today to be carved into their familiar forms. When we picture the Ice Age, we imagine cold winds and snow-covered ground, but to truly understand this era, we need to step deeper into the climate and atmosphere that shaped life during those frozen millennia. The world's climate was not just colder, it was structured in rhythms and patterns that defined everything from the oceans to the winds, from the growth of forests to the survival of the great animals that roamed the land. The Ice Age climate was not static. It pulsed with change, flowing between periods of intense cold, known as glacials, and slightly warmer intervals, known as interglacials. These cycles were controlled by forces far beyond human hands, forces rooted in the tilt of the Earth, the shape of its orbit, and the way our planet danced around the sun. Average global temperatures during the coldest stretches of the Ice Age were nearly 10 to 15 degrees Fahrenheit colder than today. That difference may sound small at first, but in terms of climate, it was monumental. The drop in temperature was enough to create massive ice sheets that covered much of North America, Europe, and Asia. In the United States, winters were not merely chilly. In the northern regions, they were brutal, with glaciers pressing down over entire landscapes, shaping the atmosphere itself. Cold winds swept across plains and forests, carrying with them the breath of glaciers, air that was dry, sharp, and unforgiving. The atmosphere was also thinner in terms of greenhouse gases. Carbon dioxide levels were far lower than they are today. Scientists estimate that during the height of the Ice Age, coal levels dipped to around 180 parts per million, compared to over 400 parts per million in our modern era. That reduction in greenhouse gases allowed heat to escape more easily into space, locking Earth into colder patterns. For those who lived under this sky, the very air felt different, less humid, less forgiving, more brittle in the way it carried the chill. In North America, where so much of the Ice Age world unfolded, the climate created striking contrasts. In the north, icy winds carried snow across vast sheets of white, while in the southern regions, conditions were drier than today. Areas that we now think of as lush, like parts of the southeast, were once cooler grasslands, home to herds of grazing animals. Florida was much larger during the Ice Age, with sea levels hundreds of feet lower, exposing land that now lies beneath the ocean. The air carried the crispness of cooler temperatures, shaping ecosystems that balanced between survival and collapse. The atmosphere also played a key role in rainfall. Because so much of Earth's water was locked into ice sheets, the hydrological cycle shifted. Many areas that are now rich in rainforests or wetlands were drier, more prone to drought, and more fragile. Deserts expanded, not in the icy north, but in regions closer to the equator. The Sahara Desert, for instance, grew vast during colder intervals, a sandy reminder that the Ice Age was not only about frozen landscapes, but also about dryness and scarcity of water in many regions. In the US, the Great Basin became even more arid, its lakes shrinking and expanding with the cycles of glacial advance and retreat. Imagine the Nevada deserts with cooler air but harsher droughts, a paradox that defined this time. Winds during the Ice Age were powerful sculptors of the land. With the atmosphere colder and drier, dust storms carried fine particles across continents. In the central United States, thick layers of lowest wind-blown dust accumulated, forming fertile soils that would later sustain agriculture thousands of years after the Ice Age ended. But at the time, these winds created hazy skies, painting the atmosphere with a faint veil of dust, softening sunsets, and dimming horizons. Storm patterns were also different. With the presence of enormous ice sheets, the jet stream, the powerful river of air that flows high above us, shifted dramatically. In North America, this meant storms were redirected. Regions that today experience mild winters were subject to stronger, colder patterns, while other areas lay dry beneath high-pressure systems. The atmosphere was constantly adjusting, reshaping the balance of climates across the globe. For those who lived during this time, the climate defined survival. Imagine being part of an early human group in what is now the American Midwest. The air is colder, drier, and less predictable. Winters last longer, food supplies rise and fall with the climate cycles, and storms can bring sudden snowfalls that bury the land. The atmosphere is not just a backdrop, but a constant force pressing on daily life. Breathing in the Ice Age meant inhaling air that was cooler, thinner in warmth, and marked by the rhythm of a world in flux. The oceans also responded to this atmospheric shift. With sea levels hundreds of feet lower, coastlines stretched far beyond where they are today. The atmosphere above these oceans carried cooler winds, shaping currents and weather patterns in ways that created new migration routes for animals and humans alike. In the Pacific, storms shifted, carrying different rainfall to the western United States. The California coast would have looked different, its skies shaped by cooler ocean currents, its breezes sharper and fresher than today. In Alaska and Canada, the atmosphere was colder than most life could tolerate, dominated by ice sheets and frozen tundra. But in regions farther south, the climate created unique environments: grasslands, woodlands, and open plains that supported megafauna like mammoths, mastodons, and giant bison. The atmosphere determined the range of these creatures, drawing them toward regions where cold was bearable, but food was still available. And as the atmosphere shifted between glacial and interglacial periods, ecosystems had to follow. In warmer interglacials, forests expanded, rainfall increased, and life flourished, only for the cycle to reverse as ice advanced once more. This ebb and flow of climate was a constant reminder that the Earth's atmosphere is not a static blanket, but a living, breathing system, always in motion. In the United States, the atmosphere carried a special story. It separated regions locked in ice from regions that could still support rich ecosystems. It carved boundaries between glaciers and grasslands, between frozen tundra and desert basins. It carried the seeds of migration, pushing humans to move, to adapt, and to follow the climate's patterns. For early people, the sky itself was a signal. When the air grew colder, when storms shifted, when the seasons changed, it meant altering paths of travel, changing methods of hunting, and finding ways to endure in a world that offered no guarantees. So The climate and atmosphere of the Ice Age were not simply cold. They were complex, layered, and deeply connected to the Earth's cycles. They determined where glaciers could form, where deserts could spread, where oceans could rise and fall, and where humans and animals could make their homes. They were the breath of the planet during a frozen era, a force that whispered across plains, held across glaciers, and carried the silent story of a world defined by ice. When we picture the Ice Age, it is easy to imagine cold air and frozen water, but to truly see the Earth as it was, we must look at the landscapes themselves. These were not just backdrops of ice and snow. They were sculpted worlds, carved by glaciers, etched by winds, and reshaped by the passage of time. During the Ice Age, the land was in constant transformation, and what we see in the United States today, the Great Lakes, the rolling hills of the Midwest, the rugged valleys of New England, are reminders of the power that ice and stone once held over the Earth. Imagine standing at the edge of a massive ice sheet. Before you stretches a wall of frozen blue-white, hundreds of feet high, pressing outward like a slow-moving tide. These glaciers were not still. They flowed, inch by inch, their immense weight grinding down the land beneath them. Rocks, soil, and forests disappeared under the crush of ice, carried along in a slow conveyor belt of frozen movement. Over thousands of years, valleys were widened, rivers were redirected, and mountains were softened. The landscapes of the Ice Age were alive, not in the way we think of life, but in the restless motion of ice shaping stone. In North America, one of the most striking legacies of this sculpting is the Great Lakes. These vast bodies of water, Superior, Michigan, Huron, Erie, and Ontario, were once deep grooves cut into the earth by glaciers. As the ice sheets advanced, they dug into the soft rock, gouging basins that would later fill with meltwater when the glaciers retreated. Today, the Great Lakes are among the largest freshwater systems on Earth, but in the Ice Age, they were scars carved into stone, waiting to be filled by the thaw. For early people wandering through this land, those lakes would become lifelines, shaping migration routes and offering sources of water in a cold world. The Midwest, often thought of as flat and gentle, also bears the mark of the Ice Age. The rolling hills and fertile farmland of states like Iowa and Illinois were created from glacial deposits. As glaciers advanced, they carried rocks and soil with them, then dropped this material as they melted. The result was rich, thick layers of soil loess that would one day support the breadbasket of America. In this way, the Ice Age did not just sculpt beauty, it laid the foundation for human survival long after the ice had vanished. If you move further east, into New England, the Ice Age landscape becomes rugged and dramatic. Glaciers there scraped away soil, leaving behind bare bedrock and countless boulders scattered across the countryside. These erratics, as geologists call them, were carried by glaciers for miles before being deposited in fields and forests. To the people of the Ice Age, they would have been natural monuments, silent reminders of the power of moving ice. The coastlines of Maine and Massachusetts were also reshaped, their inlets and bays carved by retreating glaciers, creating the jagged, beautiful shoreline that still defines New England today. To the west, in the Rocky Mountains, glaciers sculpted alpine valleys. Imagine high peaks covered in ice, with glaciers crawling down the slopes like frozen rivers. Over time, these glaciers carved U-shaped valleys, distinct from the sharp, V-shaped valleys carved by rivers. Today, when hikers walk through places like Glacier National Park in Montana, they are moving through ancient Ice Age handiwork. The cliffs, cirques, and ridges were all carved by the frozen grip of advancing and retreating ice. Farther south, in areas that were never fully glaciated, the Ice Age still left its mark. The deserts of Nevada and Utah, part of the Great Basin, held enormous lakes during cooler, wetter intervals. One of the largest, Lake Bonneville, covered much of what is now Utah. Its remnant is the Great Salt Lake, a salty echo of a once vast inland sea. During the Ice Age, the atmosphere allowed these lakes to expand, filling valleys with fresh water. When the climate shifted and the ice retreated, the lakes shrank, leaving behind dry basins and salt flats. Standing on the Bonneville salt flats, today, one can almost hear the whisper of waves that lapped at its shores during the colder age. The western United States also tells the story of Ice Age floods. In what is now Washington state, massive floods swept across the land when glacial dams holding back enormous lakes broke open. The Missoula floods, as they are known, unleashed torrents of water so powerful that they carved deep canyons, called coulees, and left behind giant ripple marks in the land. The channeled scablands of Washington are still there today, a rugged, rocky terrain that speaks of waters unleashed by melting ice. And then, of course, there are the caves. During the Ice Age, as glaciers reshaped the surface, underground spaces provided shelter for both animals and humans. In the limestone regions of the Midwest and Southeast, caves became safe havens, cool in summer, warmer in winter, and dry when the world outside was cold and wet. These caves preserved not only the bones of Ice Age animals, but also the presence of humans who sought refuge there. The landscapes of ice and stone were not only physical, but also psychological. For early humans, the sheer scale of the glaciers must have been overwhelming. Standing before a wall of ice, hearing the groans and cracks as it moved, feeling the winds rushing off its frozen face, these experiences would have been etched into memory. The land itself seemed alive, powerful, and beyond control. And yet, humans adapted. They followed the edges of glaciers, hunted in valleys newly carved by ice, and learned to see opportunity in the midst of change. Even as glaciers retreated, they left behind water that reshaped the land once more. Rivers swelled with meltwater, carving new paths. Floodplains expanded, lakes filled, and wetlands spread. The Missouri and Mississippi rivers were fed by these changes, growing into the mighty waterways that would become central to the continent's future. Water, released from the grip of ice, became the new sculptor, carrying forward the work that glaciers had begun. Every corner of the United States carries echoes of this frozen artistry. From the rocky coastlines of New England to the fertile soils of the Midwest, from the mountain valleys of the Rockies to the dry basins of Nevada, the Ice Age landscapes were not fleeting. They remain with us, reminders of a time when Earth's cold hands shaped stone into new forms. To walk across America today is to walk across a gallery of Ice Age art, a land etched by ice and revealed by the slow passage of time. When we step into the Ice Age world, the land is not silent or empty. Beneath the icy winds and across the glacial valleys, life persisted. Plants rooted themselves in frozen soil, animals moved across plains, and ecosystems adapted to the cold rhythms of the climate. To understand the Ice Age fully, we must look not only at the glaciers and landscapes, but also at the living communities that endured within them. The flora and fauna of this time were survivors of extremes, shaping their bodies and behaviors to withstand environments that tested the very limits of life. The plants of the Ice Age tell a story of resilience. In regions blanketed by glaciers, life could not flourish, but at the edges, where ice retreated into tundra and grasslands, vegetation spread in hardy forms. Across North America, tundra ecosystems dominated the frozen north. Low-lying mosses, lichens, and small shrubs formed mats on the ground, their roots shallow, their growth slow. These plants were built for endurance, not abundance. They clung to thin soils, surviving short summers of sunlight before retreating into dormancy during long, harsh winters. In what is now Alaska and Canada, this tundra spread like a carpet beneath the cold sky, providing food for the herds of grazing animals that followed its growth. South of the tundra, vast grasslands stretched across much of the central United States. These mammoth steppe ecosystems were among the most productive landscapes of the Ice Age. Grasses, sedges, and herbs covered wide plains, able to withstand colder temperatures and drier air. The diversity of these grasslands supported great herds of animals, from mammoths and bison to antelope and horses. These plains were alive with movement, the sound of hooves pounding against frozen soil, the constant rhythm of grazing and migration. For plants, survival meant not only enduring the cold, but also adapting to grazing pressure from enormous animals. Their growth cycles became tightly linked to seasonal changes, pushing upward in bursts of green during the brief summers, then retreating into seeds and roots as the frost returned. Forests existed too, but they were different from the ones we know today. In the northern United States, spruce and pine forests grew at the edges of the ice, forming dark green walls against the white of glaciers. These coniferous forests provided shelter for animals like moose and caribou, as well as predators that followed them. Deciduous trees, such as oaks and maples, were pushed farther south, thriving in regions where winters were cold but not dominated by ice. In states like Tennessee, Kentucky, and Virginia, Ice Age forests would have felt both familiar and strange. Similar trees, but arranged in ways that reflected cooler climates and shifting rainfall. In the southeast, vegetation was more varied. Florida, expanded by lower sea levels, hosted wetlands and grasslands, dotted with palm-like plants and hardwood forests in cooler forms. The balance between wetland vegetation and dry grasslands created habitats for mastodons, giant ground sloths, and other species that relied on a mix of browsing and grazing. In California, oak woodlands and chaparral vegetation were cooler, shaped by the Pacific climate, while the higher Sierra Nevada hosted alpine plants clinging to rocky slopes, much as they do today, but at lower elevations. The fauna of the Ice Age is perhaps the most iconic, a cast of giant animals that define our imagination of this era. Among them, the woolly mammoth stands tallest. Covered in thick fur, with long, curved tusks sweeping outward, mammoths roamed across the mammoth steppe in great herds. They grazed on grasses and sedges, their massive bodies sustained by the productivity of Ice Age plains. In North America, a close relative, the Columbian mammoth, lived farther south, larger and less furry, adapted to more temperate climates. For humans who encountered them, mammoths were both a source of awe and survival, providing meat, hides, and bones that could be shaped into tools. Alongside mammoths were mastodons, stockier cousins with straighter tusks and a preference for browsing on trees and shrubs. They roamed the forests of the eastern United States, breaking branches and stripping bark with their strong jaws. Mastodons were as much creatures of the woods as mammoths were of the grasslands, a reminder that Ice Age America was a mosaic of habitats, each supporting different giants. Predators, too, roamed this frozen world. The saber-toothed cat, Smilodon fatalis, prowled the plains and forests, its elongated canines adapted for striking down large prey. In the West, particularly in California, their remains are preserved in the La Brea tar pits, where animals drawn to trapped prey became ensnared themselves. These cats were not alone. American lions, larger than any lion alive today, stalked the grasslands, while packs of dire wolves hunted in coordination, bringing down prey much larger than themselves. The Ice Age was not only about survival in the cold, but also about the constant dance between predator and prey. Other iconic animals included the giant ground sloths, slow-moving browsers that tore down branches with their immense claws. Some stood as tall as small buildings when rearing on their hind legs, reaching for leaves high above the ground. North America was also home to camels, ancient relatives of today's desert dwellers, and horses, which evolved on this continent before spreading elsewhere. Herds of bison, some larger than modern species, thundered across plains, while pronghorn antelope darted with incredible speed, a survival strategy honed by generations of predators. Birds too filled the Ice Age skies. Large vultures and condors soared across open plains, feeding on the remains of megafauna. Waterfowl gathered in Ice Age wetlands, migrating along routes that stretched from the Arctic to the Gulf of Mexico. Even in cold times, the cycles of migration continued, linking continents with the wingbeats of birds. Smaller creatures played their part as well. Rodents adapted to the cold by burrowing, storing seeds and roots against the lean months of winter. Rabbits and hares, with fur that shifted to white in snowy seasons, provided prey for foxes and smaller carnivores. In the forests, insects and fungi maintained the quiet cycles of decay and renewal, breaking down plant matter and enriching soils for the next year's growth. The interactions between flora and fauna shaped Ice Age ecosystems in profound ways. Grazing herds of mammoths and bison maintained open grasslands by trampling and feeding, preventing forests from reclaiming too much ground. In turn, the grasslands provided the foundation for countless species, from insects to predators. In forests, mastodons and giant sloths shaped the structure of trees, browsing heavily and opening spaces for sunlight to reach the understory. Each species played a role, keeping the ecosystems in balance even as glaciers advanced and retreated. For humans living during this time, the flora and fauna of the Ice Age were both a challenge and a gift. The plants provided food and materials. The animals provided meat, hides, and bones. To survive, people had to understand the migrations of herds, the cycles of plant growth, and the dangers posed by predators. In many ways, humans became part of these ecosystems, adapting alongside other species, and leaving their own mark on the balance of life. The Ice Age world was not barren. It was vibrant, filled with diversity, shaped by the resilience of life under difficult conditions. From tundra mosses to mammoth herds, from pine forests to saber-toothed cats, the flora and fauna of the Ice Age were threads in a vast tapestry of survival, woven into landscapes of ice and stone, breathing beneath the shifting skies of a colder Earth. The Ice Age is remembered not only for its glaciers and frozen landscapes, but for the enormous creatures that walked across its plains and forests. These were the Megafauna giants, animals so massive and extraordinary that they capture our imagination even now. Their silhouettes against the icy horizon defined an era. To picture the Ice Age without them would be to miss the heart of its story, for these giants were not just inhabitants of the land. They were symbols of survival, adaptation, and the raw scale of life when Earth was colder than it is today. The woolly mammoth is perhaps the most iconic of all. With long, shaggy coats of fur, thick layers of fat, and tusks that curved elegantly forward, they were perfectly built for the cold. Standing up to 13 feet tall at the shoulder and weighing as much as 6 tons, mammoths were among the largest land animals of their time. They roamed the great grasslands known as the Mammoth Steppe, moving in herds across vast distances, grazing on the tough grasses that covered the plains. In what is now the northern United States, mammoths would have been a familiar sight. Their footprints pressed into frozen earth, their presence a reminder of endurance in the face of unrelenting cold. For humans, mammoths were vital. They provided meat, hides for warmth, bones for tools, and tusks for carving. In many ways, mammoths were not only giants of the land, but giants in the story of human survival. Close to the mammoths were the mastodons, another enormous relative of the elephant family. Mastodons were stockier, with straighter tusks and coats adapted to cooler forests rather than open plains. They stood slightly shorter than mammoths but were still immense, weighing up to 5 tons. Unlike mammoths, who grazed on grasses, mastodons preferred browsing on shrubs, branches, and tree bark. They thrived in the woodlands of eastern North America, from New England through the Midwest and into the South. Their teeth, designed for grinding woody material, show us how specialized they were for their environments. To walk through an Ice Age forest in what is now Ohio or Pennsylvania would have meant sharing the land with mastodons, their heavy footsteps breaking branches, their trunks stripping leaves from the trees. Predators grew to astonishing sizes as well. The saber-toothed cat, Smilodon fatalis, is one of the most dramatic examples of Ice Age megafauna. With muscular bodies, powerful forelimbs, and elongated canine teeth stretching up to 7 inches long, these cats were built for ambush hunting. They likely targeted large prey such as bison, horses, and even young mammoths. In California, the La Brea tar pits have preserved hundreds of Smilodon fossils, offering a haunting glimpse into the lives of these predators. Imagine walking the grasslands of Ice Age California, aware that in the shadows, a saber-toothed cat could be waiting, silent and patient, ready to strike. Alongside the saber-toothed cats were the American lions, Panthera atrox, among the largest cats to ever live. They were bigger than today's African lions, with males possibly weighing over 600 pounds and measuring more than 11 feet in length from nose to tail. These lions roamed widely across North America, stalking prey across grasslands and forests. Their sheer size and strength placed them at the top of the food chain, a reminder that the Ice Age was a time of predators as well as prey. The dire wolf is another legendary figure of the Ice Age, larger and more robust than modern gray wolves. Dire wolves hunted in packs, using cooperation to bring down animals much larger than themselves. Their remains, too, are found in great numbers at the La Brie tar pits, suggesting that they were highly social and opportunistic hunters. To the human groups living at the time, the howls of dire wolves would have been an unsettling sound across the frozen night, a reminder of competition and danger. Among the giants were the enormous ground sloths. Some species, such as Megatherium in South America, were truly colossal, but in North America, the Jefferson's ground sloth was still impressive, reaching lengths of up to 20 feet and weighing several tons. Slow-moving but powerful, ground sloths used their massive claws to pull down branches and strip leaves. They could rear up on their hind legs to reach higher vegetation, towering over other animals. Despite their size, they were primarily herbivores, shaping forests and woodlands with their constant browsing. Bison also thrived during the Ice Age, and they too grew to massive sizes. The steppe bison, Bison latifrons, carried horns that stretched more than 7 feet from tip to tip, wider than the height of most people. These bison traveled in herds, grazing across the plains, their movements shaping the grasslands. Their presence would have been a spectacle, thundering hooves, clouds of dust, and the low, resonant calls of thousands of animals moving together in survival. Another striking member of the Ice Age giants was the giant beaver. Unlike the small, industrious beavers we know today, these animals grew up to 8 feet long and weighed nearly 200 pounds. They lived in wetlands and rivers, shaping their environments just as modern beavers do, but on a much larger scale. Their massive size would have made them a dominant presence in lakes and streams, gnawing on vegetation and altering waterways. Camels, surprisingly, were also part of North America's Ice Age menagerie. Though today, we associate camels with deserts in Africa and Asia, they actually evolved here. The camel species that roamed North America during the Ice Age were large and adapted to colder climates, browsing in woodlands and open plains. Eventually, camels migrated across the Bering Land Bridge into Asia, leaving behind only fossils in their original homeland. Horses too were native to North America during this time, evolving here before spreading to other continents. During the Ice Age, they thrived on the grassy steppes, moving in herds across vast distances. The Ice Age even gave rise to enormous birds. Giant condors and vultures soared above, feeding on the remains of megafauna left behind by predators. Some species of flightless birds, though less common in North America, existed in other parts of the world, demonstrating that gigantism was a widespread phenomenon of this era. What made these giants possible was the abundance of resources during certain intervals of the Ice Age. The mammoth steppe, stretching from Europe across Asia and into North America, was the most productive ecosystem of its time, supporting vast herds of grazers. In turn, these herds supported populations of predators and scavengers. The cycles of glacial advance and retreat continually reshaped the availability of habitats, but for tens of thousands of years, the giants thrived. For humans, these megafauna were both companions and competitors. They were sources of food, clothing, and tools, but also dangers to be avoided. Hunting a mammoth or bison required cooperation and courage, while avoiding saber-toothed cats and dire wolves demanded vigilance. The relationship between humans and megafauna was complex, woven into the survival strategies of both. The presence of these giants gave the Ice Age its unique character. To see a herd of mammoths moving across the steppe, to hear the thunder of bison, to witness the silent ambush of a saber-toothed cat, these were everyday experiences in a world that now feels distant and almost mythical. The megafauna were more than just animals. They were part of the fabric of life, shaping ecosystems, influencing human behavior, and leaving behind legacies that endure in fossils, bones, and stories carried through time. The Ice Age was not only the realm of mammoths, saber-toothed cats, and glaciers. It was also the stage on which early humans found their place in a cold and challenging world. To imagine life during this time is to step into the shoes of our ancestors, people who faced an environment unlike anything we know today. Theirs was a life of adaptation, ingenuity, and survival, a life written into the windswept plains, the frozen forests, and the firelit caves of the Ice Age. Early humans lived in small groups, bands of families and communities bound together by the need to endure. Their world was colder and harsher than ours, but it was also filled with opportunity. Across the continents, humans followed the rhythms of the land, hunting animals, gathering plants, and using every resource the earth provided. In North America, evidence suggests that people arrived during the last Ice Age, crossing the Bering Land bridge from Siberia into Alaska. This vast stretch of land, exposed by lower sea levels, was not a narrow passage, but a wide, habitable region of grasslands and tundra. Here, humans and animals alike migrated, following herds of bison, mammoths, and horses into new territories. Life for these early people was intimately tied to the climate. The seasons were extreme, with long, frigid winters and short, productive summers. Shelter was a necessity, not a luxury. Caves, where they were available, provided protection from wind and snow. In open plains, humans built shelters from bones, hides, and wood, creating warm, insulated spaces where fire could be kindled. Fire was the heart of human life during the Ice Age, not only a source of warmth but a gathering place for stories, a tool for cooking, and a defense against predators lurking in the darkness. Clothing too was a matter of survival. The skins and furs of animals became garments, stitched together with bone needles and sinew thread. Imagine a group of hunters returning with a mammoth, its immense body providing meat for weeks and hides thick enough to craft clothing and shelter. Every part of the animal was used. Bones became tools, tusks became carvings, sinews became cords. Nothing was wasted, because nothing could be. Survival meant creativity, and creativity became culture. Hunting was both a necessity and a dangerous endeavor. Large animals like mammoths and bison required coordination, planning, and courage. Early humans developed strategies, driving herds into traps or toward cliffs, where the animals could be more easily taken down. Spears tipped with stone points, such as those known from the Clovis culture in North America, were used with skill and precision. Hunting was not simply about strength. It was about intelligence, cooperation, and the ability to read the land and the animals themselves. Smaller game also played a crucial role in daily life. Rabbits, birds, and fish provided food when larger hunts failed. Gathering plants, roots, and berries filled in the gaps, though during colder stretches, plant foods were limited. This balance between hunting and gathering created a flexible way of life, one that allowed humans to adapt to shifting climates and environments. The Ice Age was also a time of migration. As glaciers advanced and retreated, people followed the changing landscapes, moving southward into the heart of North America. Archaeological evidence suggests that by the time the last Ice Age was ending, humans had spread across the continent, reaching as far as the Great Plains, the deserts of the Southwest, and even the tip of South America. Each environment demanded new adaptations. In the forests of the East, hunting mastodons and deer required patience and stealth. In the grasslands, speed and coordination were essential for tracking bison herds. In coastal regions, the sea provided fish, shellfish, and marine mammals, adding another layer to the diet. Art and expression also blossomed during the Ice Age. Across the world, cave paintings reveal scenes of animals, hunts, and symbolic figures. While fewer examples are found in North America compared to Europe, carved tools, decorated bones, and personal ornaments show that creativity was part of human life here too. To imagine an Ice Age camp at night is to picture not just survival, but culture. Around the fire, people told stories, passed down knowledge, and shared visions of the world. These stories connected communities, linking the struggles of daily life to a sense of belonging and meaning. The dangers were constant. Predators such as saber-toothed cats, dire wolves, and lions posed threats, especially to small groups traveling across open land. Harsh weather could turn quickly, with blizzards sweeping across the plains and freezing winds stealing warmth from unprotected bodies. Food shortages could occur when herds moved beyond reach, forcing people to rely on whatever they could find. Yet despite these challenges, humans thrived. Their ability to adapt, to use tools, to cooperate, and to learn from one another allowed them to endure in a world where so many other species eventually disappeared. The Ice Age also forged deep connections between humans and the animals they hunted. Each successful hunt was a triumph, but it also carried risk. Standing before a charging bison or mammoth required courage and collective strength. The respect for these animals is reflected in the artifacts left behind, in carvings and symbols, that suggest humans saw them not only as prey, but as powerful beings woven into the balance of life. As time passed, the technologies of survival advanced. Spears evolved, shelters improved, and fire-making became more reliable. Knowledge of the seasons, of migration routes, and of edible plants grew with each generation. What may have begun as mere survival slowly transformed into flourishing cultures, each uniquely adapted to the challenges of the Ice Age world. For people living in what is now the United States, the Ice Age meant living alongside giants. Imagine waking to the sight of mammoths grazing in the distance, hearing the calls of dire wolves at night, or following a herd of bison across the open plains. Life was precarious, but it was also full of wonder, with each day offering a new chance to endure and explore. Early humans were not passive in this landscape. They were active participants, shaping and being shaped by the world around them. The story of early human life in the Ice Age is not just a tale of hardship. It is also a story of resilience, creativity, and community. It is the story of people who faced a world colder, harsher, and more unpredictable than our own, and yet found ways to thrive within it. They left their marks in the land, in the bones of hunted animals, in the tools they crafted, and in the stories they carried forward, echoes of which still reach us today. The end of the Ice Age was not a sudden event, but a gradual unfolding of change. Imagine a world locked in cold for tens of thousands of years, where glaciers stretched for hundreds of miles, and the air carried the crisp bite of frozen winds. Then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, the balance began to shift. Temperatures crept upward. Ice that had seemed eternal began to melt. Rivers swelled with water from the thaw. Grasslands expanded. Forests spread, and animals that had long roamed the frozen plains found their habitats changing before their eyes. It was a time of transformation, a turning point in Earth's history, and one that would shape the landscapes, the species, and even the people who called this planet home. The last glacial maximum, the height of the Ice Age, occurred about 20,000 years ago. Ice sheets blanketed much of North America, covering regions that today hold bustling cities, farmland, and forests. The Laurentide ice sheet, in particular, stretched across Canada and reached into the northern United States, burying land beneath ice more than 2 miles thick. But around 19,000 years ago, the climate began to warm. Slowly at first, then more rapidly, the ice sheet started to retreat. Where once there had been endless wide expanses, meltwater carved rivers and lakes, reshaping the land into valleys and basins. This retreat was not a smooth process. It happened in pulses, with sudden cold snaps interrupting periods of warming. a dance between ice and climate that lasted thousands of years. As the glaciers melted, the sea levels rose. During the height of the Ice Age, so much water had been locked in ice that the oceans were more than 300 feet lower than they are today. Vast stretches of land connected continents, including the famous Bering Land Bridge between Asia and North America. But as the ice retreated, the seas reclaimed this land. Slowly, the bridge disappeared beneath the waves, cutting off the route that humans and animals had once used to cross between continents. Coastlines shifted, flooding valleys and creating bays. What had once been rolling plains became the Gulf of Mexico's shoreline, the Chesapeake Bay, and countless other familiar features of modern geography. The animals of the Ice Age felt these changes deeply. The mammoth steppe, that vast expanse of cold, grassy plains, began to shrink. Forests moved northward, and with them came new species. For some animals, like moose and caribou, the changing landscapes offered opportunity. For others, like the woolly mammoth and the saber-toothed cat, the world that had once sustained them began to vanish. Food grew scarcer, habitats shrank, populations dwindled. The giants that had dominated the Ice Age began to fade from the earth. Humans, too, adapted to these shifts. As the great herds declined, people turned increasingly to smaller animals, fish, and plants. They developed new tools, refined their hunting techniques, and began experimenting with early forms of cultivation. Archaeological evidence suggests that in different parts of the world, including the Fertile Crescent and Mesoamerica, people started to domesticate plants and animals during this transitional period. The end of the Ice Age, then, was not only about loss, it was also about beginnings, the first steps toward agriculture, settled communities, and eventually civilization itself. In North America, the end of the Ice Age brought dramatic transformations to the land. Glaciers carved the Great Lakes, leaving behind vast bodies of water that still define the geography of the Midwest. The retreating ice uncovered fertile soils, shaping the landscapes that would one day feed millions. Meltwater floods swept across the continent, some so massive they altered the course of rivers and reshaped valleys in a matter of days. One such event, known as the Missoula floods, sent torrents of water rushing across the Pacific Northwest, carving out deep canyons and leaving behind rolling hills of gravel. These floods, violent and overwhelming, were part of the Earth's natural reshaping as it adjusted to a warmer world. The climate shifts were not always steady. Around 12,900 years ago, during a period known as the Younger Dryas, the warming trend suddenly reversed. For over 1,000 years, temperatures dropped sharply again, bringing back near glacial conditions. The cause is still debated, but some scientists believe it may have been triggered by disruptions in ocean currents caused by massive pulses of meltwater. For the humans and animals of the time, it was yet another challenge, a reminder that the Earth's climate is never fixed, but always shifting in response to powerful forces. When the Younger Dryas ended around 11,700 years ago, the Ice Age finally drew to a close. The Holocene epoch, the warm period we live in today, had begun. By this time, many of the great megafauna had vanished. Mammoths lingered in small, isolated populations on remote islands for a few thousand years longer, but their era was over. Saber-toothed cats and dire wolves disappeared, leaving behind only fossils and the echoes of their once dominant presence. The reasons for these extinctions are complex. Climate change played a role, as habitats shifted and food sources diminished. Human hunting may have accelerated the decline, as our ancestors, armed with sharpened tools and cooperative strategies, placed additional pressure on already vulnerable populations. Disease and ecological disruption may have also contributed. In truth, it was likely a combination of all these factors, a web of changes too great for the giants of the Ice Age to withstand. Yet even as species vanished, others thrived. Animals we know today, deer, elk, bears, wolves, and humans, found ways to adapt and expand into the new environments created by the retreat of the ice. The end of the Ice Age marked not just the fading of an old world, but the birth of the one we now inhabit. Forests spread across North America, rivers stabilize, and climates grew more predictable. With these changes came opportunities for growth, settlement, and the gradual emergence of cultures that would shape history. The legacy of the end of the Ice Age is all around us. The Great Lakes, the Mississippi River Basin, the fertile soils of the Midwest, all are gifts of retreating glaciers. The stories of lost animals, preserved in fossils and oral traditions, remind us of the fragility of life in the face of change, and the resilience of early humans, who adapted to shifting climates and landscapes, speaks to a capacity for endurance that still defines us today. To picture the end of the Ice Age is to imagine a world in transition, where the deep silence of ice gave way to the rush of rivers, where the roars of mammoths faded into memory, and where the seeds of agriculture and civilization were quietly beginning to grow. It was an ending, yes, but it was also the dawn of a new chapter, the world warming into the familiar patterns that would eventually cradle all of human history. Though the Ice Age ended thousands of years ago, its presence lingers all around us. It is written into the landscapes we see, the animals that roam the forests, the rivers that carve their way across the land, and even the climate patterns we continue to experience today. To walk outside, to look at a map, or to watch the changing seasons is, in many ways, to glimpse the echoes of that ancient cold age. The Earth we know now is deeply shaped by the legacies of ice, and those legacies continue to remind us of both the resilience of nature and the power of change. One of the most visible marks left behind is the very shape of the land. During the height of the Ice Age, glaciers covered vast portions of North America, carving deep valleys and smoothing mountain peaks as they advanced and retreated. Their slow movement, grinding against rock and soil, left behind features that remain defining elements of the continent's geography. The Great Lakes, which today hold about 1/5 of the world's surface freshwater, were created by these massive ice sheets. As glaciers moved south, they gouged out enormous basins, and when the ice finally melted, those basins filled with water, becoming lakes so large they shaped entire regional climates. If you have ever stood on the shore of Lake Superior, looking out at water that seems to stretch as wide as the ocean, you have been looking at the direct handiwork of the Ice Age. Glacial valleys are another striking reminder. In places like Yosemite, the U-shaped valleys were carved by thick rivers of ice that once flowed slowly but relentlessly through the granite. Even today, the sheer cliffs and smooth valley floors carry the signature of glaciers that vanished long ago. Across New England and the upper Midwest, countless smaller lakes, kettle ponds, and rolling hills called moraines trace the retreat of the ice sheets. These features are not just scenery, they are geological records, silent storytellers that whisper of a time when ice ruled the land. Rivers too carry the imprint of the Ice Age. The courses of the Mississippi, Missouri, and countless smaller rivers were influenced by the flow of meltwater from retreating glaciers. Floodplains rich with fertile soil were created by layers of silt and sediment carried south from the melting ice. These fertile lands later became the breadbaskets of America, sustaining agriculture and human settlement on a scale unimaginable during the Ice Age itself. Every field of corn or wheat planted in the Midwest owes part of its productivity to the glaciers that enriched the soil long before farming ever began. The legacy of the Ice Age is also found in the species that survived. While many of the great megafauna disappeared, others adapted and endured. Bison, for instance, once shared the mammoth steppe with giants but found ways to thrive in the grasslands that followed. Moose and caribou, adapted to cold environments, still wander northern forests and tundra. Bears, wolves, and mountain lions, though descendants of Ice Age ancestors, remain part of our ecosystems today. When we look at these animals, we are seeing living links to a colder, wilder past. Even domesticated species carry this legacy. Horses, which evolved in North America during the Ice Age, went extinct here but survived after spreading into Eurasia. They were later reintroduced to the Americas by Europeans, changing the course of history for countless indigenous peoples. Dogs, too, trace their origins back to the Ice Age, when wolves and humans formed bonds of cooperation that would reshape both species. The loyal companions in our homes today carry the genetic memory of a partnership first forged in the firelight of Ice Age camps. Humans themselves are perhaps the greatest legacy of the Ice Age. The challenges of survival during that time demanded ingenuity, cooperation, and adaptability. The skills honed then tool-making, hunting strategies, the use of fire, and the creation of shelters laid the foundation for later advancements. The Ice Age forced us to innovate, and those innovations became the roots of culture, art, and society. Every story told, every tool crafted, every fire lit was part of a long continuum that eventually led to agriculture, cities, and civilizations. In that sense, the Ice Age did not simply end. It gave birth to the human world we know today. Climate patterns we experience now are also tied to the end of the Ice Age. The Holocene epoch, which began roughly 11,700 years ago, has been shaped by the stabilization that followed the retreat of the ice sheets. Seasons became more regular, rainfall patterns steadier, and temperatures more moderate, allowing for the rise of farming and permanent settlements. Yet within this stability, we still feel echoes of the past. Glaciers remain in high mountain ranges and polar regions, remnants of the great ice sheets that once dominated the planet. Their retreat in modern times, accelerated by global warming, reminds us that Earth's climate is never static and that even the mightiest of ice fields can vanish. The Ice Age also left behind stories, preserved in the oral traditions of indigenous peoples across the Americas. Tales of giant animals, great floods, and changing landscapes are more than myths. They are cultural memories of a world in transition. Archaeology and geology now confirm what these stories preserve, that humans witnessed and adapted to immense changes, carrying the memory of ice and fire through generations. The landscapes shaped by the Ice Age are not just relics. They are living environments that continue to influence our lives. National parks, forests, and farmlands sit on ground molded by ice. Lakes and rivers created by glaciers provide water, transportation, and recreation. Mountains sculpted by ancient ice draw visitors from around the world. To hike a glacial valley, to paddle across a kettle lake, or to drive across the Great Plains is to move through the legacy of a time that still breathes through the land. Even the mysteries of the Ice Age continue to shape science today. Questions about why the megafauna went extinct, how humans spread across continents, and how climate shifted so dramatically continue to be studied. Ice cores from Greenland and Antarctica preserve ancient air, allowing scientists to peer back into the atmosphere of tens of thousands of years ago. Fossils reveal the lives of creatures long gone. Each discovery adds another piece to the puzzle, another layer to our understanding of how the Ice Age shaped the world we inherit. To live in the present is to live in the aftermath of ice. Our rivers, our soils, our coastlines, our forests all carry the fingerprints of glaciers and cold winds that sculpted them. The animals around us, the crops that sustain us, the very climate in which we flourish all bear the influence of that distant age. The Ice Age may feel like a distant story, but its legacy is woven into every part of our daily lives, quiet but enduring, ancient yet immediate, shaping the earth we know and the paths we continue to walk. As we come to the end of this journey through the Ice Age, we can see how deeply that frozen era still lives within us and around us. The earth of that time was a world of contrasts, of immense glaciers and sweeping plains, of fierce cold and quiet resilience, of towering megafauna and small bands of humans finding their place among them. It was a time when survival demanded creativity, when life was constantly adapting to change, and when landscapes were being shaped into the forms we recognize today. We have traveled through the vast stretches of ice and stone, walked among mammoths and saber-toothed cats, and felt the struggles and triumphs of early humans as they built fires against the cold and followed herds across shifting lands. We have watched the glaciers retreat, carving valleys and lakes, and witnessed the fading of giants as the earth slowly warmed. and we have come to understand that the Ice Age is not gone. It lingers in the soils that grow our food, in the animals that share our world, in the rivers that wind across the land, and in the very climate patterns that cradle our lives. The story of the Ice Age is also our story. It is a reminder of how fragile life can be in the face of great change, but also how enduring, how adaptable, and how creative it can become. Just as the glaciers once carved mountains and valleys, the challenges of the Ice Age carved resilience into the fabric of humanity. From those cold plains and firelit shelters grew the roots of the civilizations we know today. And so, when we look at a mountain valley, or stand on the shore of the Great Lakes, or walk through a forest that once lay beneath ice, we are seeing not only the legacy of a distant age, but also the deep history of our own place on this planet. The Ice Age whispers to us still, in stone and water, in memory and in story, reminding us that change is constant, that the earth is alive, and that within every ending lies the seed of a beginning.